Curves. If you click on this button here, you'll be represented with the curves controls of DaVinci. You have 6 different types of curves in DaVinci. You can access the different types of curves through clicking on the buttons on the top here, or through the drop-down menu. Let's start with the main curves controls. Every curve represents the image from the highlights to the shadows, with the midtone in between. So if I grab the top handle and move it down, you'll notice that I'm affecting the highlights without affecting the shadows. And if I grab the curve from the middle point and move it down or up, I'm affecting the midtones without affecting the shadows or highlights. And finally, shadows. If I move the shadows, I'm going to be affecting shadows without affecting the highlights. Notice that moving the highlights or shadows will affect the midtones unless you have a pin in the middle to actually hold the midtones in place. The main question is why curves, as long as we have the same controls over highlights, midtones, and shadows in the color wheels. The answer is precision. Notice that I can control the midtones, the highlights, and the shadows, and I still have more points to control in the middle. I can add as many points as I want to. Notice that I have 4 curves here. By default, they're ganged together. So if I move any of the curves, it will affect all the other curves at the same time. But I can change that by coming to the top right and unchecking Gang Custom Curves. Now if I move the red, I'm only affecting the red channel. And if I'm moving the blue, I'm only affecting the blue channel. So if I wanted to change the highlights of the blue channel, I can just come to the blue channel here and drag it down. Soft clip clips the highlights or the shadows from passing certain points. The next type is hue versus hue. This is where you change the hue of a certain hue in the image. So you can pick the greens and change the hue of the green parts of the image. Let's select red first. I'll click here to select red. Now I have 3 points. This point represents red. The other points here were automatically added in order to prevent me from changing the rest of the image. So I'll grab this point here, drag it down, and drag it up. So I'm changing the hue of the red parts of the image only. Let's reset that and come back here to this image and choose green. Now I have 3 points added also. This point in the middle represents green. The other 2 points just prevents me from moving anything else other than green. I'm going to grab the middle point and move it down and up. And you will notice how the hue of the green color is being changed. Okay, let's choose red now. I'm going to click here to choose red. And I'm going to move the red handle now. Let's reset. Once you have the hue versus hue curve selected, you can hover over the image to choose a certain color range. So if I click here, it actually picked this particular green, and notice that I have a much narrower selection. And I can go back to selecting this particular green. The next curve is hue versus saturation. It's the same concept where you choose certain hues in the image and apply a certain effect to this hue range. So with hue versus saturation, what I'm doing is I'm selecting a certain hue, green again, but this time this control controls the saturation of the image rather than the hue. So if I move this down or up, you'll notice that I'm changing the saturation of the green parts of the image. Let's choose red and change the saturation of red. Notice that I'm changing the saturation of red without changing or affecting any of the other colors in the image. Let's reset. Next is hue versus luma. Again, it's the same concept. We're applying luma changes to certain hues in the image. Again, I'm going to pick green and try to change the luminance of this green. Hue versus Luma rarely works. It's one of these curves where you have to be very careful and move it just a little bit because it can break down the image. Notice the effect happening on the image once I push the Luma of the green parts of the image far. And let's reset again. And the last one is one of the most important curves. It's Luma versus saturation. This is where you apply saturation controls over certain Luma values in the image so that you can change the saturation of the shadows or the highlights or the midtones. Notice that I have the same controls here to select certain points like shadows or highlights in an image.